So, I signed up for Samsung's Ultimate Test Drive program, in which they send you a free phone for 30 days. So, I'm going to be reviewing the Samsung Galaxy S6 Edge from an iPhone user's perspective. The design ain't bad. There are more logos on this thing than Apple allows, but all in all, this is a pretty sexy phone. Glass front, glass back, and aluminum sides. It's a little thicker than the iPhone 6, but let's be honest, nobody cares. It's a little taller and wider too, but not significantly so. The larger 5.1-inch screen is nice to have, but doesn't seem to make a big difference in everyday use. The iPhone feels nice in the hand with its curved edges, while the Galaxy is overall nice as well, but feels a little sharper due to the defined edges. The iPhone is also a little less noticeable in the pocket. We have to talk about that Edge screen. Overall, the AMOLED screen quality is very good, with bright, vibrant colors and great viewing angles. Samsung has some gimmicky stuff like quick contacts on the Edge, but the one feature I found pretty cool was the nighttime clock. At a time of your choosing, you can have a clock which displays the time, your alarm, the date, and your battery life automatically display on the Edge, but it's a little hard to read unless your head is resting above the display. You can also swipe back and forth to get the information stream, quote-unquote, which would be helpful if it weren't so hard to actually pull off. Overall, I think the Edge screen makes the device worse. For the majority of daily use, it's just a really nice screen that looks distorted at the edges. Both cameras are very good and seem to be very high detail. Better than my iPhone 6, but the video stabilization does wonk out every so often. As we move on to usability, I want to first mention battery life. It seems pretty average overall, but I think the iPhone has better power management. At the end of the day, I usually end with 50% battery life on my iPhone, whereas with the Galaxy S6 Edge, it's usually almost completely gone. There's no reversible charging connector like Apple's Lightning connector here, but the Galaxy does have wireless charging, which is something the iPhone desperately needs. The fingerprint recognition system is very good, maybe slightly better than the iPhone 6, but the home button does have a slightly smaller surface area to work with. I assume this phone has pretty good specs, octa-core, Exynos, and all that, but specs don't matter, user experience does, and this phone is fast. It usually feels more responsive than my iPhone. Certain apps like Twitter seem to lag more, but the Google apps are definitely better on Android. As far as UI goes, Android still seems to be a hodgepodge of interfaces with every app kind of doing its own thing. I never intuitively know how to operate an app like I do with iOS. There are no universal audio controls, which I have found a bit annoying. There seem to be lots of updates needed to this and that, a lot of which the OS should handle on its own. iOS is definitely better at touch rejection. I'm frequently accidentally tapping and touching things, which is halfly due to the capacitive buttons. I'm not the biggest fan of iOS's cartoonish icons, but the iconography in Android is all over the place due to the lack of standards. The animations are inconsistent also. It seems like it's always doing a different thing. There are third-party workarounds, but I really miss iOS's baked-in continuity features. Being able to quickly text people from my computer is a godsend. The bright spot is text entry and selection. The number keys above the keyboard are great. Backspace is fluid rather than jumpy like in iOS, and quickly selecting text is far more accurate than iOS. Fine selection is lacking, however. The darkest spot is inertial scrolling. Apple had this mastered at the beginning, but on Android, as on Windows, it's all over the place. There's no consistency, and I never know how far it's going to scroll. One of my most used apps on iOS is the Reminders app, which, while hellishly buggy, works better for me than Google's baked-in reminders, which don't sync to the desktop properly and are not quickly accessible via any app. Android is filled with these little quirks. Reminders don't actually display on the lock screen. When exiting apps, you're not taken back to the folder you were in, which is disconcerting. When receiving a text or another notification, the screen doesn't turn on by itself. You still have to hit a button to view them, which is annoying. There's a physical back button on all Android devices, but in some apps, there's actually a software button as well. But not all apps. Again, inconsistent UI. And as I said before, I'm accidentally hitting the hardware back button and the hardware multitasking button all too frequently. App search is not great. On iOS, I can usually just swipe down, type a letter, and get to the app I want, whereas with Android, it usually takes a little bit more work. Specific to the Galaxy Edge, I'm often interacting with on-screen elements as I squeeze the phone to lock or unlock with the sleep-wake button. Certainly, it's not all bad. Being able to dismiss notifications from the lock screen is a godsend and something that iOS should adopt right away. But it is a little annoying that only a couple will display at a time. Also, Google Now is better than Siri. Everybody knows it. Google Now is faster, it's more accurate, and overall, it's better than Siri in every way. It's a shame that the allow Google Now to unlock the phone setting doesn't really work. And Siri's one strong point is that it does have more support for like in-car and dash buttons and stuff like that. Speaking of in-car use, when the GPS signal is lost, the navigation with Google Maps ends, which means if you have the phone locked and lose GPS signal, you'll be driving in a straight line until you decide to check it. There were a couple instances when I was driving and I said, okay, Google, and the phone's just like, nah, you're going to have to retrain that. Interacting with the device in the car is dangerous, and I felt I had to do it a little bit too much. I miss having quick access to the calculator app. The placement on iOS has always been a bit strange to me, but it's always a swipe away, and it turns out I use a calculator pretty frequently. The Note Edge does have an app drawer that you can swipe in from the edge, but it doesn't. You can't always access it from any app, and it doesn't always display, and it's a more difficult gesture to do than the iOS version, which is just swipe up anywhere from the bottom. So all in all, the Galaxy S6 Edge is not a bad device at all, and Android is not a bad OS at all, but there's just too many quirks for my liking, and I'm going to be switching back to my iPhone. See ya, Galaxy. Thanks so much for watching. Now click the subscribe button, or I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. Speaking of Donald Trump, click the video annotation link here to learn more about what I think about his political positions.